Alright, what's up y'all? So, on the next step here, we need to grease down and trim up our first set of belly strands. And so I wanted to have you guys see me do this so you can kind of get an understanding on how much grease this stuff really soaks up, and also just a basic understanding of trimming chrome split. Now at the end of the day, we have some mildly jagged sections here, and we're just looking to clean that up and clean up the taper. And all I'm really going to do on screen is just on camera for you guys is I'm just going to soap all this down, and I'm going to trim one strand, and then I'm going to trim the rest of the strands off camera, since from that point on it's just matching everything up really. And then we'll move on to the next section of braiding this first belly on. I'm not going to bother cutting out the second belly on camera at all. The only difference is you just use math, and for the second belly, it's a 9-foot whip, so it's going to be 4.5 feet is the halfway mark. So the second belly is going to run up to 4.5 feet, and this particular belly is going to run up to about 2.5 feet, roughly 2.25, 2.5 feet. And so you just do the math to figure out how much strands you need for that. But yeah, I just want to give you guys an idea of the process of it. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to polish up our blade. Make sure it's good and sharp. That should be that. Alright, so first handful of braiding soap, and ultimately what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a hold of one strand and walk backwards with it. Pretty much about that right there. And then I'm going to grab the next strand, do the same exact thing, grab a hold of it, walk backwards with it. Grab another handful since that's all gone. That's one handful for 2 strands. One handful for 2 strands. Next strand. Just a little bit of that up here. Yeah. And the next strand. Now, you don't really want to cut or try to cut the chrome split or trim it up dry. It's really tough, to be honest, to try to do that. So it's better to grease it down, rub the soap in real well, let it absorb for a moment, and then we'll take over this extra and we'll use it to grease up the yolk real well. Get up all the extra off my hand here. And we'll just kind of come through, kind of rub everything in a little bit, spread it out a little bit more. Thing to always remember when you're working on whips, when you're making whips, when you first start out, big thing is you can always go back over top of the overlay with more conditioner, braiding soap, whatever, to add more fats and keep the leather healthy, but you can't reapply on the inside. And so you want to make sure that you lather up as much as possible that you can. One of my personal things that I like about chrome split bellies and so forth is that it absorbs so much grease and will ultimately maintain so much of it. So now I'm gonna go ahead and try to change the camera view here a little bit. Let's see here as we get ready to start some of the trim work. Some of this you're going to be able to see really well, and other bits you won't. And that's okay. The emphasis is just give you guys an idea. Now I'm going to be trimming this freehand. I'm not going to be using any guides or anything like that, because it's not as important for this belly to be perfect. Nobody sees it in any way, shape, or form. Can you guys see that well? Yeah. Nobody really sees it. So the emphasis is to just clean up the edge a little bit, but most importantly, the taper. So cutting this from the hide, it's kind of difficult to get. I wonder if I should have you guys come over here on this side. It's kind of difficult to really get a full-blown accurate cut right from the hide. This is not like kangaroo, right? So even though I taper down, you're going to see here there's almost little to no taper that's really happened, right? But that's okay. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we facilitate that taper and so forth. So we're going to cut this down to a nice, good, solid, even taper all the way through. I'm not going to take off too much at first. Just a little bit. And as we get down, take off more and more and more as we taper. Cut the piece off there. Start tapering a little bit. And I'm also not going to end this taper super thin either. Maybe I'll move it back and you guys can follow me. I'm not going to make the taper super thin either, because remember, chrome split is not super durable, right? The emphasis of chrome split, and why we're even using chrome split to begin with, is that it has an amazing ability to hold a lot of braiding soap. It's supple. It's more supple than anything else that we'll use. So it's going to create a nice, unique action on the whip, as long as you're braiding tight. That's the thing. It's the thing with this chrome split, guys. If you're going to use this chrome split, you have to make sure that you're braiding your overlays very, very, very tight. There can be no room for slack, because you're not getting the same amount of support that you would normally get from kangaroo or even cowhide or something, whatever else you're using your belly for, right? So got a little bit of an edge here I want to clean. Yeah, not really. It's not too bad. No, it's not really worth it. All right, so now I'm going to take you guys by hand here and just kind of show you what I've done. All right. So these are the two strands, two of them right next to each other. I've taken quite a bit off, right? And that's okay. And you'll see here kind of how we trimmed on their way down. A little bit of messy bits there, but like I said, it's not as important. That's all going to get covered up. I'm going to go back up and clean that little spot there here in a second. Right. So you see, and that's about where I've ended the taper. I won't go any slimmer than that. That'll be where I keep it at. So So with that particular portion done and over with, I'm gonna go clean this up a little bit and finish the rest of the strands, and then we'll get ready to start the braid. So we'll come back to you when that's that time. Alrighty, so you guys can see here, trimmed everything up and matched it as best as possible. Again, it's a belly, doesn't have to be perfect, and especially with this chrome split. Again, you're gonna see when we get to this, but as we get to this chrome split and as we start working with it, one of the biggest things that you're gonna see that's really unique about this stuff is, especially after you're done braiding and when you roll, it's just gonna smooth out. You grease it down real well and you roll it, it's gonna smooth out. It becomes like molding clay. I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you whatsoever. So here is our belly. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna soak it down real well with some more braiding soap, and we're also gonna go ahead and re-grease this yoke again. Just want to get about as much as possible in there that we possibly can. And then I'm gonna open this vise up here. Oops. I'm gonna lay all this in there. I don't bind on the handle until it's all done. So what you see here is I'm eyeballing up about how the braid is going to go on, and I want the braid to start within the last inch and a half or so of where the handle foundation is, and so that's about it right there. That's about where I want to start the braid. So now I'm just going to lay this in just like that, and it's going to mold itself around there for me perfectly. And then I'm going to close this up real good. This is looking on camera here. Perfect. Yoke it down real tight. Now, remember, the key with chrome split is not to pull extremely tight. If you pull extremely tight, you're going to bust it. You're going to break it in half. The stuff is not ridiculously strong, but once the strength of this, the durability, and all the pros of this material do not come into effect, or do not come in to the picture until the overlay is braided on, right? That's the big key. That's the big key. Let's see here. Just gotta go under, over. So what I've done here is I've crossed the two fronts, right? One over top, and then the back, I'm crossing the left side under the right side, and then it's going to go over the front right side. And then I'm going to do the opposite on the opposite corner. So here we are. Here is our chrome split belly, and we're going to get started braiding here. So as I braid this, I'm going to pull on it, but I'm not pulling on it too ridiculously tight. Just enough to kind of close things up. You can see me kind of pulsate my tugs a little bit here. I want this cord to be more folded up and rounded on itself. Also, the big key with working with this stuff is braiding soap, right? So now we're actually using strands that aren't quite wide enough to really fully cover everything, right? And so what you'll notice that I'm doing is I'm going to pull on the core and I'm going to push upward, and that's going to pack all the strands in. And that's how, even with a mildly thinner in width core that we have, or thinner in width strand that we have, we're still able to cover the circumference that we want. And we're also changing our angle to an outward pull rather than pulling directly towards me. And you can see it sliding around up there. So we're getting plenty of pull. You just can't completely muscle it same way that you would do kangaroo. If you muscle it like you do kangaroo, you're going to break it in half. You'll break it right in half. And then you either have to make a new belly or you have to figure another way to get it figured out. Put it back in. That can be very difficult with this stuff. Guys, back of here so you can keep seeing as I keep braiding. Since this isn't super long belly, you guys can stay with me with it. Now again, I'm going to come back for some more braiding soap, because the emphasis is I want it to slide around on itself the way that it needs to. I want to have plenty of lubrication for the strands to slide. This prevents me from getting too tough of a grip to where I break it with my hands, as it's more difficult for me to actually get a good grip on it. But it also prevents it from snagging up on itself, which is going to, will clearly cause a break. Dog's up there barking at my wife. $20 my wife is eating something and the dog's barking because she wants food. That's how she gets. A stinker. Same thing. I'm pulling. You can see the strand moving. I can't emphasize the importance of not pulling too hard. Chrome split's very difficult to work with. It really, really is. It can be very, very, very hard. Simply because I get it, you know, it's a much more fragile material. But I promise you, the end result will be a very pleasing effect on your whip. That's why I'm doing this video. I've seen a lot of other videos out there of, you know, your typical style builds. I know Terry Jacka wasn't the only guy who used chrome splits. I know there were a couple of makers, a couple of other Australian makers that did, but it's just interesting. We're going to do a little bit of detangling here. It's just interesting to see different makers try different things and so forth. And I think it was Adam Winrich and Casey Tyler, both friends and have been helpful in my journey as a whip maker, who, you know, kind of talked to me about Terry Jacka and his methods with chrome split. And out of focus. 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 Here, let's try this. Maybe we'll lower this down. Just try like that. Well, that's a pain in the butt because I gotta reach around. That's all right. It's only for this short little belly. So we're going to end the braiding of this belly right where this core ends. Untangle. This stuff definitely likes to tangle up really well. So remember, this particular whip, I'm not going to do a bolster after this belly. I'm not going to apply a bolster until after the second belly. So when we finish this, I'll cut out second belly off camera. The only difference is the second belly will be a little bit wider, width and strand, and the strands will be longer, like I said. Follow the right, method that you want. I usually do for calculating strand lengths. For me, it doesn't matter if it's kangaroo or really any type of leather. The formula that I like to use is whatever the length of what the braid is supposed to be times 1.5. So usually, for instance, if I was, say, cutting out an overlay for a 10-foot whip, it comes out to be about 14 feet of strands that I need, right? So if I was doing a second belly of a 10-foot whip, I think I would do, what would that be? That would be 7 feet. I would cut 7 feet of strands. That's going to cover the braided portion. However, I need to make sure that I have loose strands left over to fill the core for the next layer. So if that was a second belly, we would be talking about the overlay. So I would have 7 feet of strands to cover 5 feet of braid, and then I would have 5 feet of strands added on top of that because I want 5 feet of loose belly strands to maintain filler for the next layer. So do the math on that, that comes up to 12 feet. So I would need 12 feet of lace. So same thing is going to go with second belly of this whip, roughly. Remember, we're doing a 9-foot whip, but it's roughly the same. I mean, it's 6 inches difference. So I'll cut about 12 feet of strands of chrome split, and that'll be for the second belly and the loose belly strands, and then go on after that. And that's about that right there. I would call that good. Pull each strand just a tad. I'm going to take this top strand here and we're going to tie it off. So next step is we're going to roll it. And, well, no, we're not going to roll it. Now we're going to go back up here to the handle and we're going to clear that out. So you can see here, focus. I've got the braid, so you can see. Okay, so here's what we have. Now we have to clean off. You see here we've got this excess, right? As we wrap things up here, you can see that this butts up real good. But then we've got this excess. We don't want to leave that there because that will create a lump, right? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our trusty scissors. I like to use these smaller white ones for this particular job. But all I'm basically going to do is I'm just going to come along this ridge that's poking up, and I'm just going to cut off that excess there just as we go down. And I'm going to do one side at a time in case I need to adjust anything. Remember, if you cut too much off at once, then you can't fix it after that, right? Okay, how do we do here? Fix that little piece. That's going to close up well. okay. Still got a little bit too much here. So we're gonna clean that up. Looking still a little too much here. Ultimately, we want it to be flush. A mildly small gap is okay. A mildly small gap is okay. Because that can be filled in. That can be, well, even a large gap can be filled in. You can cut more material. You can cut a strip and lay it in there. But if there's an overlap, then you're going to wind up with a lump. We don't want lumps, because that lump will just get worse and worse and worse as you braid over top of it. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. All right. So now for this particular part, I'm just going to take my lace, my sinew here, go up to the top, just gonna start wrapping. Just making first wrap. We'll do several wraps of this. I learned the hard way. If you don't wrap this good, especially with chrome split, you can wind up with a mild swivel in your whip down here in the handle. So you have to think of it like this, right? If you don't grip this area here down enough, right, then at least for me, when the whip is all done and over with, right, and I've put the overlay on, and I start attaching lead or whatever to build up the heel knot here, when I do that and I use nails, right, to drive in, those nails are going to drive all the way into this leather here at the very beginning. And if I don't have this all bound tight enough, it's going to, the nails are going to grip all the different layers, and you are going to wind up with a swivel, a swivel knotted bullwhip. And trust me, the reason why I know this, because I had that happen with my first prototype chrome split Indiana Jones Temple of Doom whip. There was a swivel on that handle, and it's not too bad. I mean, it throws you off at first, but you get adjusted to it. But still, it's not ideal. You don't want that, especially if you're making whips for a customer. We don't want that at all. I'm doing fairly tight wraps here as I do this. We'll do one more wrap here. Create a little loop. 1, 2, 3. Tighten everything up real good. And voila, a little snipperoonie. It's time for a good rolling. Come back to you on the floor. All right. So now we're going to roll this out. Get this nice and smooth. I don't know if I covered. I think I did cover rolling already. Excuse me. Remember, this is my first video. I'm not the best at this. Anyways, so yeah, we're gonna roll this down and let you guys see how that's gonna work out. Change this here. What I'll do from this point, scoop this over here. What I'll do from this point is I'll kind of roll like this, using my second hand to facilitate a roll over here. That really helps. Most of all the pressure is being done on the right hand. I'm sorry, the left hand. Work that transition real well. Feel a little bit of a lump in there. We'll work that out. Okay. So, this is the end product of what we wound up with, right? So you can see how well all of that just mushes together so well. And that there is one of the very reasons why I've started falling in love with using this stuff. That very reason right there. And so what you will find is that when this is all done, second belly and bolster can have such a smooth surface here. When I go to braid on the overlay, it's going to be so nice, so round, so smooth. And at the end of the day, remember something. Even though I could take one of these and pull it in half, right? I can do the same thing with kangaroo. I can tell you right now, no matter how much I pulled, this would not come in half. And we've got more layers that are going to go on top of it, right? So that's that. So now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to measure this entire, from the beginning of the handle up the loose ends here, and I'm going to measure to 4.5 feet. That's going to be the halfway mark for our 9-foot whip, and I'm going to cut that off. All right, here at their little measuring table. Now, you guys don't necessarily need to see this because you know how to measure and cut, but just to make sure you have an understanding of what I mean. So we've got 3 feet from end to end, right? 36 inches. So we start at the very beginning. We're going to do 3 feet. That's 36 inches plus 12. That is, wait, no, 12 and a half. Oh, buddy, that was close. That was close. 12 and a half. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 18. That was close. That was close. Let's cut all that off. All right, so this is what we've been left over with. We've got our braided belly, and we have our loose strands here. So now I'm going to take this back over to the vise, and we're going to cut all these down to a very fine taper. So I'll come back to you when it's time for that. All right, so this next step that we want to do, very crucial, very important. We want to make sure that we bind this transition area, and we're going to bind about, so here's right here's where the transition is. We want to bind a bare minimum 6 to 8 inches past that, with the heaviest amount of binding being in this 3-inch area, right? That's where the heaviest amount of binding is. We want to make sure that's good and tough. But the reason why we want to bind outward 6 to 8 inches, because we want to make sure that we taper. We want to taper that binding, and we will bind just about each layer. So when we first start, we're going to make sure we're using ample amount of pressure. Especially right on that transition. Fill that in a little bit. We want to have plenty of reinforcement there. If this were an indie whip or something along the lines of that, like a David Morgan style, I really wouldn't do very much binding there. I really only bind the first 2 inches, which is more than what David Morgan even did, from what I understand. But though I don't mind a looser transition, I don't want a noodle. So I just add a little bit extra, just for safekeeping, to make sure that that transition is not going to break down. At the end of the day, I want the whip to last. So that is pretty good. So we're going to go back up now. We're going to maintain the same level of tightness. Back up as we did on the way down. So we did one way down, and we did one way back up, creating our crisscross. And we're going to go back down again, filling in the gaps. This is thanks to Nick Schrader for this particular method of binding. I'm going to pick that up from him, and watching his many wonderful videos on how to make nylon whips. Some of the other leather whip projects that he's done as well. And customer wants a mildly stiffer transition. So we're going to do this with each layer. Now, when I said he wants mildly stiff, he wants it stiff, but he doesn't, because I mean, essentially we're doing kind of a Jacka build, slightly. And we're talking Jacka after Terry started doing the binding, but we're just not doing it as intense, meaning we're not going to carry out 2 feet of binding in that. I would say this about right here is pretty darn good. Just feel like I want to close that area in there a little bit. Okay. 2. Actually, we'll just do 2. A little snipperoonie. All right, and then the last thing that we're going to do real quick before we move on to the next stage last thing that we're going to do before we move on to the next stage is we are going to lower you guys down here. We are going to trim off these loose belly strands, and we're going to taper them down well. So try to get in as much as you can. And there's no rhyme or reason or method to this madness. We're just gonna start where we are and begin to taper, and we're gonna taper it down to a pretty fine point. And then what I'm gonna do is just come back and show you guys all of them, all the points tapered very finely down. There's one. There's our next victim. Try this side. There's our next victim. Same thing. Start cut. Start it going. And then we'll start to taper. Thing for the next one. Try on this side. And the last one. Actually cut that one a little short, but that's okay, because that'll help facilitate our taper a little bit. All right. So, here we are. Here's our taper as it goes down. Like I said, I had a little bit of an oopsie daisy and cut that one a little short. That's okay, because it'll facilitate the taper a little bit more. And as you can see here, we tapered them down real thin, right? These here are pretty weak. This is pretty weak. If I pull on that real hard, those will break, right? So we want to be careful with those. So, and that's pretty much it. That is our first belly. The last step that I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this binding area one more time. And then our next step is to cut out and trim the second belly and be ready for that. But that right there is our whip. And we're good to go. So yeah, I'll come back to you guys as soon as I have that second belly cut out and trimmed and ready to go. All right, guys, being a dad of many little lovely children, it's nap time, and no better time than to go ahead and start cutting out the overlay for this 9-foot whip. So with that being said, 9 feet, we are going to be looking at roughly 13 feet of strand. That is what we're going to need to do. We are also going to be cutting strands that are mildly thinner, not super thin, but mildly thinner than what I would naturally do for, say, for example, an indie whip. And the main reason behind that is that we're doing more of a kind of Terry Jacka build. And so as a result, we want our strands to be slightly thinner in width, so that way when we braid at a slightly wider angle, and as a result, it provides for a slightly more flexible whip as well. So with that being said, I'm going to set my strander here. Now for you guys, when you first start doing something like this, you might want to go ahead and take measurements. One of the things that have been shared to me, shout out to Blake Gory for this piece of information, he usually likes to go by the formula of, or he encouraged me to go by the formula of your strand width times 1.2, and if it's a particularly stretchy hide, do times 1.3. So for example, if I was going to be cutting for, if I wanted my final width of the strand to be 8 millimeters, I would probably cut somewhere around 11 millimeters or something along the lines of that. But one thing to be noted is that I predominantly use only gray skin or gray species kangaroo. A lot of people are unaware. I probably would have been unaware had it not been for some of the mentors that poured into me over it, but there is a difference between red species kangaroo skins and gray species. Red species tend to be slightly smaller. Their hides will tend to be slightly lighter and also slightly thinner in thickness, but they will also be more stretchier. And one of the pros to red species kangaroo is that when you split down specifically to thinner levels, it allows you to split thinner than you can with gray species while still maintaining a good majority of its tensile strength. Whereas gray skins will tend to, once you get to a certain point, thinning the strands down by splitting them, once you get to a certain point, they kind of start to lose strength. So it's a catch-22. The other cool factor with red species is that the grain pattern on the top skin of the leather tends to be tighter, and as a result, it produces a whip that once you have it finished and shellacked, it will give you a much cleaner and shinier whip, and more of a kind of a quote-unquote mirror finish if you want that type of look. I mostly stick to gray skins because I like the fact that they don't stretch as much, and I don't like to split too much to begin with anyways. I actually prefer to keep a majority of my overlays unsplit. I will be splitting this overlay, but very, very, very mildly, because to be honest, even though it's a gray skin, it's still not even that thick. It's about 1 millimeter, which is pretty much where everybody wants to keep their stuff anyway. So I honestly may not split this, to be honest. It's not thicker. Now I've had some much thicker hides that I've used, but on an indie whip, that's kind of the look that you go for anyways. The David Morgan, David didn't really split his overlays at all or anything, so that's kind of what you go for. And I personally have not really found there to be much of a difference. I've split skins in strands and braided with them, and I've not split strands. I know there's this context that, when you stretch your strands, some places are a little bit thicker than others. I mean, yes, but I've never seen a noticeable swell created because you approach, a part of the hide or a part of the strands, and since we're cutting a yoke, all the strands are grouped together, and they just so happen to be mildly thicker in that area. I've never seen it create any type of lump, bump, or anything along the lines of that. So, to me, I think it's preference based. If you want to do it, do it. I typically will only split only if I'm really trying to keep the profile down. If I'm trying to keep it as slim as I possibly can, for whatever reason, then I would do it. Outside of that, I typically don't. I kind of like Glenn Denholm made a short video once where he talked about it, where he basically, cut a piece of lace, yanked and yanked and yanked on it, and it wouldn't break. And then he ran it through a splitter and he yanked on it one time and it pulled in half. I kind of favor the same context. I feel that having a mildly thicker overlay will grant me with add a little bit additional weight to the whip, which I like and I tend to prefer. And overall, it just means that the overlay, each individual overlay strand is going to be tough as nails, as tough as you can possibly get it. So that's that. So with that particular note, I'm going to start the cut on this, and then I guess real quick I should make mention one of the big plus sides to gray skins is that when they aren't split, they are much less stretchier. These do not stretch nearly as much as red skins. I also feel that they're a little tougher. The strength on them is a little bit greater. It's only when you start splitting them down too much that they kind of become subpar to what red skins do. So, but yes, I love the gray skins. Plus they're naturally normally bigger too. So being bigger means two things. Well, really just one thing. It just means that you get more out of each eye. So yeah. All right. So at this particular point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start cutting with the yoke here. And once I get the strand started, I'm going to stop the video and transition into a time-lapse video. And you guys can enjoy the time as I walk through and do a little time-lapse on it. So yeah. So again, here we have my modified strander. I've taken the cylinder out and glued in a couple of credit cards there, and this is going to help me be able to just easily cut my yoke. I don't have to worry about marking anything because it's all already going to be well taken care of. So at this particular moment, I'm going to start cutting out the hide strands. All the way over to that first leg, and we're doing 12 strands, so that's what we're going to follow through with. This blade's good and sharp, sliding through nice and easy. So I do want to make mention, and I don't know, I'm still trying to process whether or not I'm going to do a time lapse because that can get long. But anyways, I do want to make mention. So because I was talking with somebody about this a few weeks ago as they were progressing through their own journey with whip making, and it comes up to the context of why do we cut a yoke from the left leg or from the leg and cut around and not start the yoke from somewhere else. And what it was the person had an issue where as they started braiding, one of the strands broke away from their yoke, and so they kind of thought, well, gosh, why does everybody do that? This is a weakened area, and so I want to explain something. Just to help you guys understand why we would cut from this area. So this leg, right, this whole leg here, right, when we get into the hide, right, now, I guess I should have covered this, but better late than never. Again, apologize, it's my first time doing a video. So why do we cut the hide the way that we cut it? Now mine was already trimmed, right? I had already trimmed it up, ready in preparation for the overlay. So here's what we come down to, right? This whole area here, the leg, is a weaker section. And this leg over here is a weaker section as well. we know that the strongest section is along the back line, and the most strength is going to be kind of within this circle. That's where the good majority of all the strength is going to be, right? The belly area is going to be a little bit stretchier and a little bit weaker, and then this is normally where the neck would be, and there's a little shoulder area here, and the shoulder area will be, usually this is what I find is that this area here is the stretchiest part of the hide. This can be mildly stretchy depending on how much you remove, and also depending on each hide. Every hide is different. And then this area here, where the back leg kind of pit would be, where the back leg joins the belly, that's also usually tends to be a weaker area. So again, back to the discussion that I was having with a friend of mine on why we cut the yoke from the leg. So, is this a weakened section? Yes, 100%. This is a weakened section right here, right? And even the first maybe inch or two in is also mildly weaker than any of this here. All of this from here to here is very, 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 very tough. You find that there's hardly no stretch, right? I'm gonna pull on this and you're gonna see that there's no stretch that comes out. There's nothing, there's zero stretch, right? So the reason why that we cut our yoke from the way that we do is when it comes down to braiding, and when you're braiding your handle, right? So this section here, this is all from here to about here is most likely going to be underneath of your heel knot, right? So when you really factor that in, and when you really get down to the nitty gritty of things, none of this is really going to matter. And you also have to understand that this stuff here that's mildly weaker in comparison to the rest of this here, this stuff here is all going to be over the handle, right? So for instance, for an 8-inch handle, now we're doing a 10-inch handle, but for an 8-inch handle, right, you're talking around anywhere from 11 to 13 inches is going to be on the handle, right? And if that's on the, and what you have to know is that the handle doesn't take any wear and tear from movement in the whip. It doesn't move anywhere, it doesn't do anything. So if you have a weaker section when you're first starting out, you actually want that section to be over top of the handle. And why is that? Well, that's because the handle is not moving. It's firmly in place and strengthened by a steel or fiberglass, a hard core. So you don't have to worry about, it being tough leather that's going to wear through the, everything, the wear and tear of everything. Now, when you really think about the parts of a whip, what parts of a whip take the most beating? Well, we always know, of course, the fall takes the beating. That's, for instance, why we add a fall onto a whip, because it can be replaced when it takes too much damage. We also know that the last probably 2 feet to 3 feet, depending on the length of the whip, also takes a pretty heavy beating, because that's the portion of the whip that is usually traveling much faster than the rest, and it's also the portion of the whip that is usually being drug on the ground, even if you're using your whip in a safe place like grass. So what is the next most abused portion of the whip? That is going to be your transition. Your transition, in my opinion, takes more abuse than even the tip of the whip, and the reason why is because the tip of the whip takes abuse based on force, right? Based on the crack, right? But the transition takes the most abuse based on moving parts. You have all of the weight of the front end of that whip, from the transition to the very tip. If it's a 10-foot whip, an 8-foot whip, a 6-foot whip, 14-foot whip, a 30-foot whip, all of that weight is being supported by that transition, right? So if we were to start, for instance, our yoke here, where the hide first meets roughly its strongest section, what you are going to find is then, if you calculate 13 inches, this whip is a 10-inch handle, so you're talking roughly close to 14 inches. If you calculate 14 inches up to about here, your transition is going to fall within this very much weaker section, right? Period, right? It's just going to be weaker. If we were to start, actually probably right here, if we were to start on the strongest portion, right? So we would use all this as yoke, and this would be the strength, right here on the backbone, and right where the tail is at. and we were to use that, 13, 14 inches, whatever, you know what I mean, then when you get to your transition, you're actually getting into the stretchier portion of the leather, which means it's going to be weaker. Also means it's not going to support as much, and because it's the most moved and movement abused portion of the whip, it's just going to wear down. The leather's going to stretch quicker, and before you know it, you're going to have a noodle. And so that is the main reason why we cut we start here, because the weaker portion of this start cut here, the weaker portion is going to fall over top of the handle, so it doesn't matter if it's that weak. As long as we're able and capable of being able to braid it tightly so that it doesn't move and swivel and go anywhere, then we have all of this to support the transition and to support the first foot or 6 to 8 inches after the transition, which means that you're going to have a good solid foundation for what's going to support all the weight and the movement. So that's the main reason why we do that. So that being said, I'll shut up and keep cutting. And if you're watching this video and you already knew that, that's okay. It's okay. There might be somebody who's looking to get into this, and I'm really trying to mostly just do a dump load of information for people. I know that my videography and so forth, I might not be as good in a tutorial as some other guys might be, but I want to be as informational as possible, because there's a lot of information that isn't necessarily shown on videos. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's just kind of people showing you what they're doing, and they don't necessarily. I mean, they might give you a rundown of their ideology behind it, so forth. But so yeah, I just want to be as informational as possible. I've picked up a lot of great info from some really great makers, and in all around, for not just what we're doing with Indiana Jones whip or anything along the lines of that, but just whip making in general. And I feel as a result, it's given me a very good rounded perspective. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and one more 12. We're doing a 12 plait whip, so one more 12 strands. Here. Join all these up here. They're supposed to go. All right, so now easy peasy, lemon squeezy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the yoke off here. Round off that leg. Cut that off. Round off this leg here, remaining portion of this. Spot there, clean that up. All right, that is that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry out this current width to about right here, and then I'm going to transition down. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because this area here is a lot more stretchier, so we want to make sure we have enough width of all the strands to facilitate that stretch. Now, just to show you, right? Just to show you the difference. This is where we just cut, and you can see here, watch this stretch. Look at that stretch. Look at that, right? Versus we come here at the very beginning and we pull, no stretch, no stretch, no stretch, right? That's why we cut our yoke. We cut it. We want to make sure the strongest part initially of the hide. It's going to be right there, where that transition area is going to fall. I want that transition to have weak leather. So, and likewise, the next portion of the whip that takes the most beating and abuse, the tip of the whip, right? So if we're starting the way that we're starting, where is the tip of the whip going to fall? It's all going to fall right here in the strongest section. This is all going to be the tip of the whip, which means that the tip transition is going to be reinforced and the tip is going to be reinforced. That's what we want. We want the parts that are going to take the greatest beating to be reinforced. So now that we got through the stretchiest section, I'm going to start tapering down my strands, and I'm going to taper them down relatively quickly. I'm going to show you guys how I do it. I think I've decided I'm not going to do a time lapse because I don't want these videos to be too long. So here's what we're gonna do. My cat's over there trying to play the piano. Watch her. Look at her do it. Crazy little thing. See what I'm saying? I'm always a dog person. I've always been a dog person, but I like my cats too. Cats are just insanely intelligent. Anyways, all right, so we've got here. So now about every foot, I'm gonna scale down, and we're gonna start out by scaling down 1, 2 turns. It's really one whole turn, really. It's a half and another half. We're gonna cut a foot right down to about where the neck is. We're going to taper pretty quickly. There she goes again. Ouch. Just cut myself. It's just a flesh wound. Better get us a little band-aid. Hold tight. Happens. Blood all over customer's whip. That wouldn't be nice. All right, keep on going. All right, I'm gonna go down another 2 half turns, another turn, I should say. Go about a foot. And this will be the method that we follow straight through. This will get us a good taper. This will help us conserve some material so that we can pull our knot strands out. We want to pull our knot strands out of this too. Actually, that's half the reason why this hide was already cut into, because I used it for some knot strands for a different whip. So you can see how this strander works without having, how well it works without having that cylinder there. It's a very simple and easy modification. It does not require anything, and just makes this happen so much quicker, so much quicker. I've cut several overlays and several bellies out by hand. I can do it, and it's perfectly fine, but I'm very inconsistent. I have a lot of fat spots and I have a lot of skinny spots, and that's a lot of wasted material. We're gonna skip down. It's a lot of wasted material for really no good reason. At least on my part. Some guys, they start learning by a knife, and that is fantastic. But I'm able to be pretty quick with this, pretty efficient. I think if you start doing this freehand, after a year or two, maybe more, I don't know, you might be able to cut really fast, but I just like the ability that I can kind of get this portion done a little bit quicker. One of my favorite parts of whip making is building the different layers, the bellies, cores, and everything, and trimming the strands. I don't know why. I like cutting strands from the hide, but I honestly, my favorite part is trimming the strands for some reason. I just enjoy that. Braiding is fun, but braiding can get tedious. Plus, braiding takes a toll on your hands. Your hands start aching and hurting a little bit more and more. I did another couple of rolls down. We're probably going to end this whip in an 8-strand tip point. So we're going to end with mildly thinner strands, somewhere around 3, maybe 3.5 millimeters. For an indie whip, I would normally do 4.5 millimeters. This is not an indie whip. So I think we've pretty much stepped down as far as we're going to step down with our strander. I'm not going to go any lower, because once I stretch, this is going to get thin enough and there won't even be a whole lot that needs to really be trimmed off on the end. So after I finish cutting this, go ahead and end the video, and I'll cut the rest of this off camera. So there really isn't anything else that I need to do or that I need to show you guys. And from this point, it's just a length thing. And like I said, I'm gonna cut my strands, each of them. I'm gonna cut each of them to about 13 feet. And do it that way. And also, I should make mention, normally if I was doing like a David Morgan style whip, or a whip that was using a normal core build, so kangaroo bellies and kipskin bolster, anything other than chrome split, because chrome split's a lot weaker than most of the other things. Something that Terry Jacka did, also something that I will do, and that's that we will leave these belly strands, or these normally I would stagger my strands and I would cut them at different lengths so that when I drop them, one, I'm conserving material, but once you drop the strand, typically over time you eventually cut the strand out. So you would stagger your lengths, and you really, for like an Indiana Jones whip, since you're doing you're ending in a 6-point, you would only have 6 strands run the entire length of, for a 9-foot whip, 13 feet, right? But because this whip is being built differently, and because of the chrome split, we want to make sure that we still facilitate as much strength on the inner core of the whip as possible. So as a result, what we will do is we will cut more strands. Now you don't have to do all of them. I probably won't do all of them, but you want to cut more strands, the original length, the 13 feet, so that you have several kangaroo strands that when they're dropped, they go in and they help reinforce that area. Again, it's not that chrome split is weak, because at the end of the day, once you put this really tough and rigid kangaroo and you braid it tightly over that core, it's going to be strong. It's going to be plenty strong. But regardless of that, we still want to keep it strong and keep it strengthened as much as possible. You know, you'll never snap a whip or break a whip in half at the thong of the whip unless it's just terribly poorly made with terrible materials that just don't have any strength whatsoever. You know, you take that chrome split, you know, it doesn't matter if you did all chrome split, if you did all kip skin or all veg tan or all chrome tan cowhide or all kangaroo on the inside. The first half of that whip in most cases will probably never break. It'll never break because, you know, leather is just a tough material. So, but that last half, you know, takes a lot of beating. So we want to make sure that that's strengthened. So yeah, I will stagger these down a little bit, but we're going to keep quite a few of them. I might actually just cut all of these to the full length since we're ending in an 8 plat anyways. So yeah, we'll do that. So I'm gonna end this video here, this portion of the video. No sense of you guys seeing me cut the rest of this. It's like Bernie would say, it's like watching paint dry. And when I come back to you, we are going to start braiding on the second belly. I'll do a portion of that and cut that video short, come back to you, and we'll cut out the bolster that's going to go over top and finalize everything before adding our overlay. And I'll do a video of you guys so you guys can see the process of me trimming the strands. All right?